So we have a very interesting report that is coming out where one person out there who's claiming they have inside information to the Las Vegas Raiders, Christian Wilkins, is basically saying that Wilkins needs surgery right now and he is basically going to miss the 2025 season if he has this surgery. I want to talk about this report that is coming out. First and foremost, I want to talk about the source that's saying this because some people are going to push back right away. And some people are going to say there's just no way you could believe a guy like Mitchell Rentz, who covers the Las Vegas Raiders, has his own YouTube channel. But this guy put a report out and he didn't, say like it's like a rumor or anything like that. This guy basically said that, hey, I have an insider, a specific inside source that knows about this situation. And this person has told me that Christian Wilkins 100% needs surgery. And the Las Vegas Raiders doctors, team doctors specifically, have already said that Christian Wilkins needs surgery. He has foot pain as he's, walking. And, at this point, it's been like 7 months since he's had that surgery. So he should technically be fully healed. But because he has not fully healed, the Raiders doctors are recommending to get that second surgery. And again, Mitchell Rentz is talking about this, and I want to talk a little bit about why I think this is a solid report that's coming out. Although some people are going to push back and say Rentz is not a reliable source, I'm going to tell you guys something. I know Mitchell Rentz, right? I know him, and he does basically the same thing that I do, right? We both create content, we both cover the Raiders on YouTube, on Instagram, on Twitter, and I know so many current Raiders players, I know so many NFL players. So many guys that I've connected with over social media over the years. I speak to certain Raiders defensive linemen that start, and it's not a crazy idea that someone also speaks to Mitchell Rentz, and he also got some inside information. It could be a practice squad defensive lineman. It could be a 7th round pick. It could just be anyone that is essentially connected to the Las Vegas Raiders. And again, it's not a crazy idea that Christian Wilkins may have spoken to whatever player this is or whatever. Maybe it's a reporter, and he's essentially already told them, like, hey, this is what the Raiders team doctors are saying. This is what my plan is. And this is kind of what could potentially happen, right? So it's not a crazy idea, given that I'm kind of in the same situation where people have told me things, I'll keep it to myself. To me, it's not a crazy idea, right? So with that being stated, I want to talk about the report a little bit because this is definitely concerning. And we're going to talk about a couple other things, right? We're not just going to talk about Christian Wilkins. But this report does suck, right? So Mitchell Rentz is 100% saying that he has a legit source that has legitly already confirmed that Christian Wilkins essentially needs surgery. There's no way around it. He 100% needs surgery. The Raiders team doctors have already told him, we recommend you get this surgery, but Christian Wilkins does not want the surgery. Instead, he'd rather play through the pain because for him, he doesn't want to miss the 2025 NFL season. And if you guys do the math right now, if Christian Wilkins had surgery today, it's a 3 month at the minimum, up to 6 months in terms of the recovery process. And the thing with the Jones fracture, this is something that's happened to other people before, is the first surgery might not fix the issue, right? You sometimes have to get that second surgery. I think the number is like 20% of the time you have to get that second surgery. But once it does heal, it fully heals. There's usually no issues the way you would with like a shoulder or an ACL potentially. But you do have to get a second surgery sometimes, especially if you have that pain. And Christian Wilkins is having that pain. So we're at the point now where he has to make that decision. Either he plays through that pain or he essentially doesn't. And he gets that surgery, but then he's likely to miss the rest of the 2025 NFL season. Now, again, he could play through the pain and then have the surgery after the 2025 NFL season. Or if the Raiders are like 2-8, and they're not going to make the playoffs, he can choose to, at that point, get that surgery as well and just kind of get that jump start in terms of the rehabbing and those type of things. But apparently, Christian Wilkins needs a surgeon. I want to read to you guys exactly what this report is saying. Again, to me, I'm going to believe that this report is actually true. So Christian Wilkins needs another surgery and could be out the entire season. Rentz posted a video earlier today. I'll link that video if you guys want to check it out. He said, I had a source reach out to me yesterday and unfortunately dropped this horrific news on my plate. Here's what I know as it stands right now. Wilkins does in fact need another surgery. There has been speculation, there has been rumors, there has been multiple stories around Wilkins needing another surgery. Rentz, let me scroll down here. Rentz added that he has heard Wilkins does not want to have another surgery, but the Raiders medical team is advising him to have the surgery and avoid potential further damage to the foot. Again, if true, Wilkins needing another surgery, he could miss the 2025 NFL season. Some people have even been talking about, hey, like, terrible contract, absolutely, really, really, really bad for the Raiders. And injuries are such a hard thing to kind of predict. When you think about the Raiders giving Christian Wilkins almost $30 million a year, you think about the impact this guy could have for the Raiders, right? Wilkins is one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. The trajectory he was on, right? He was starting to dominate. Now, he wasn't great, like, right away. He was a good football player, right? Years 1, 2, 3, he was really, really good. Year 4, he took an absolute massive leap, and he just, was getting better over the years. And even for the Raiders, in like the 5-6 games he played for the Raiders, the guy was really, really, really good. There were so many plays that Christian Wilkins was impacting. I'm telling you guys, I watched O linemen, I watched D linemen. Christian Wilkins was having impact on every single play. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to make every single play, but it does mean you're disruptive. Maybe they're trying to run inside zone. You beat the guard, so now the running back has to run to the left, and then it's Tyree Wilson making the tackle, or Robert Spillane gets in there and makes the tackle. Christian Wilkins was having that type of impact for the Raiders. And from a contract perspective, some people want to say this was a bad contract, but before the injury, the contract made sense, right? You're paying for having one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. And if you don't draft the guy, then that's just the natural process. You got to pay this guy, right? Plus, I believe it was the Patriots, may have been the Panthers. One of those teams signed Milton Williams to more money than what Christian Wilkins got. Williams he's not even that good in my opinion. Christian Wilkins is actually a good football player. And again, the injury aspect of it is not something you can really predict. But if this guy is out, right? Like, if this guy ends up not being able to play for the Raiders in 2025, it's absolutely a bad contract at that point. Now, I'll be, 100% honest, and even if he can't play in 2025, if we get Christian Wilkins fully healthy for 2026 and 2027, you could still get 2 really good years out of Wilkins. Now, of course, the last 2 years, or last year and then this year as well, if he misses it, it is going to suck, right? Because you are missing out on, you're paying a guy $28 to $30 million, and you're missing out on that production. And that does suck for the Raiders. But we'll see what ends up happening. Again, the report is this, that the Raiders team doctors are saying you need to get surgery, and Wilkins is pushing back, saying, I will play through the pain. I don't know if that's a positive thing or a negative thing, right? Because he is going to have to play through that pain. And then how productive is he? Is he still able to have success? What happens when he gets double teamed? Like, will he be able to slide over and play that one technique or that nose position? Or is he going to have to line up to the outside shoulder of that guard, right? He's going to have to be that 3 technique, the pass rusher, not as much of a run defender. And Christian Wilkins is a better run defender than he is a pass rusher. How much does the foot impact him if he ends up just saying, I'm going to play through it, essentially, right? To me, this report all around really does suck for the Raiders, because it puts us in a really, really bad spot. And it's not surprising necessarily, right? We heard the report 4 or 5 months ago, whenever the first time Tony Pelini put it out. There may have been like in March. But when he first put that report out, we always knew that there was going to be a potential that Christian Wilkins has to get surgery. Now, obviously, it would have been great if Christian Wilkins could have had the surgery at that point. But also do realize that, at this point, like, Christian Wilkins had the surgery when he had it, I think back in October at some point. He rehabbed for 3 months. And then now he's been working out for the entire offseason. If he had the surgery in March, he'd have to rehab. Like, he wouldn't be able to work out for the actual season. So it would have technically impacted him if he had the surgery back in March. In terms of, he might not have been ready for the actual season, but maybe he would have been potentially ready for the playoff times or whatever, right? So I don't know. It's just a really, really, really unfortunate situation. But I do hope Christian Wilkins is healthy. Again, I know some people are going to question the actual person putting the report out, but it's different when you're talking about a rumor and you're saying, hey, Tony Pelini said this, or Adam Schefter said this, or Stephen A. Smith said this. That's different than saying I have an actual source that's reaching out to me. If you guys follow me on Twitter, about 2 years ago, I was putting out all this stuff, right? Like, hey, this offensive lineman's out and this guy's moving here and this guy's doing this. This defensive lineman isn't going to play, and this is who the Raiders expect to end up carrying into this week, or whatever it was. Right? It was like 2 years ago. That was because a Raiders player specifically was telling me all these different things. And, I've realized that there's, I don't I don't really care to put that stuff out, right? If someone tells me something, to me, it's really not a big deal. And I know Mitchell Renz for a fact also does not care to put out certain things, right? But this here is obviously completely different. This impacts the Raiders season. This is on par with like, hey, Malcolm Koonce tore his ACL. And even that report, if you guys remember, a fan had that report before any of the big reporters had it, right? Before the Vic Tafers and the Sean Reeds put it out there. The first guy that had it was literally it wasn't a content creator, but it was someone that essentially posts a lot on Twitter, right? They're a Twitter-based brand. He had it first, and people were like, hey, there's no way this report's true. And within the next couple of days, we found out the report is actually true. And then it was eventually confirmed by some of the bigger Raiders reporters that are at practice. So again, just kind of thinking it over, to me, the fact that he's saying this is per his source, I believe it. We'll see if Christian Wilkins actually still plays in this season, right? Or if he ends up deciding that I'm going to go ahead and get that surgery. We'll see what ends up happening. If it's up to me, I think he should just have the surgery. Maybe he'll be healthy to play if the Raiders make the playoffs. I think that's much better than getting a Christian Wilkins that's like 60% healthy. He's, maybe struggles, has more pain potential, more damage. I'd rather see a Christian Wilkins that's fully healthy, especially for his own long-term health, even if it doesn't benefit the Raiders, right? If the Raiders release him or trade him or whatever. As long as he's healthy and he can kind of continue that career, I think that's a lot more important. But with that, let's go ahead and switch focus. There's two more reports that I want to get into. We are at the point now where we'll be just reacting to a lot of things that are kind of said. A lot of some of the reports that are essentially coming out, at least until the Raiders training camp comes around, and training camp is not that far away. July 16th is when the rookies are going to report. And then 5 days later, July 21, 22 is when the veterans are essentially going to report as well. So, Lincoln Kennedy actually said something. And if you guys don't know, most people know who Lincoln Kennedy is. But let's just say you don't know who Lincoln Kennedy is. Really, really, really solid former Raiders offensive lineman. I'd say he's one of the Raiders' greats, right? Among the offensive linemen, even NFL, generally speaking. The guy was a really, really, really good offensive lineman. So Lincoln Kennedy was actually recently on a podcast with the Raiders, right, on the Raiders YouTube channel. And Lincoln Kennedy has rejoined the Raiders. He wasn't there during OTAs, from my understanding, but he's been there essentially since mandatory minicamp begun. And he's been watching practice. And again, keep in mind, Lincoln Kennedy is a former offensive lineman, but this guy basically is putting it out there at a new running scheme under Chip Kelly. And it's not a new scheme, right? Like, there's only so much you can really do in the NFL. But he gave us a little bit more details, and I kind of want to talk about some of what he was saying. Because Lincoln Kennedy obviously understands scheme, right? So when you hear a Raiders beat reporter that like just covers practice and asks coaches questions, they don't know the difference between outside zone, inside zone. They don't know the difference between power and G lead and just all these different run concepts. But Lincoln Kennedy does, a former offensive lineman. So he had some interesting things to say about the scheme, right? He's saying, so what I've ascertained over the last couple of practice is that there's a high regard to using a zone blocking scheme when it comes to the perimeter. But the interior, they want to use man blocking schemes. So I'm going to explain what that means here in a second. Kennedy also went on to say, I'm totally fine with being able to have that versatility, so teams can't pin down one type of scheme to try to defend against it. So let's talk about what Lincoln Kennedy is saying here, because I think this definitely gives you some insight into the Raiders scheme. And it also puts together a video that I had seen with the Raiders offensive lineman practicing a certain run scheme. So first and foremost, what Lincoln Kennedy is saying is when it comes to the perimeter runs, the Raiders, there is a high regard for using zone blocking schemes, right? So let's talk about what that means. So perimeter runs is basically outside runs, right? Not in between the tackles, but basically, right tackle, left tackle, and outwards. What Kennedy is saying is they're using the zone blocking scheme. Now, that's not necessarily a new concept or even new for us, right? We've already knew that Chip Kelly was mostly an outside zone guy. And then even outside, he runs a lot of wide zone concepts as well, right? So wide zone, outside zone, it's just a little bit different in the quarterback's angles that he's going to take. It's a little bit different with the running back, right? The running back, instead of taking, towards like the tackle, he'd be going outside, right? Even further than that. Among the offensive linemen, when you run those wide zone concepts, essentially the tackle and tight ends, right, are going to try to hook off the defensive end as opposed to with outside zones. They're gonna let that defensive end, the tackle specifically, they're gonna let him go out if he wants. They're gonna let him go in if he wants, and he's essentially gonna just move the arms and just kind of stick to his guy. Wide zone's different, right? Wide zone is like that Kyle Shanahan type of offense. It's the Mike McDaniel type of offense. It's tackles and tight ends are essentially trying to hook off those defensive ends, right? That widest guy on the line of scrimmage. It's important to recognize that when you're running wide zone, it is the best run scheme in my opinion, especially if you have an explosive running back, right? The 49ers have Christian McCaffrey. The Miami Dolphins have Devon Achane. Those two running backs are two of the best running backs over the last year or two, right? Achane really took off this past season. Christian McCaffrey had a phenomenal year 2 years ago, but it was under the wide zone scheme, right? And that's what the Raiders are implementing. And the Raiders also have an explosive running back in Ashton Jeanty. So we should also expect to have similar success. Of course, that's if Chip Kelly can properly install that wide zone scheme. But basically, Lincoln Kennedy is telling us that this is what you should expect. You should expect wide zone concepts. And I'm sure we're going to run a lot of outside zone as well, right? Outside zone's a little bit different, but it still works and it still hits well. Now, the other part of this that he says, and I think this is a little bit more intriguing, is that on the interior, they want to use man blocking schemes. And this is kind of the video that I was saying that I had kind of seen where the Raiders offensive linemen were essentially double teaming and then they were climbing up to the second level. I want to talk about what this means. So if you want to run outside zone, wide zone, those are called, zone running schemes to the outside. There's an inside and mid zone scheme as well, which are essentially interior ones. And those are zone schemes as well. So there's 4 types of zone schemes, right? So there's wide zone, outside zone, inside zone, and mid zone, right? Those are the 4 different zone blocking schemes. The 2 inside, right, the ones that go in between the tackles, is going to be inside zone and mid zone. But the Raiders aren't going to be utilizing that as much. Instead, they're going to be going to man blocking schemes, also referred to as power. And to me, this is interesting, right? Because what we're basically hearing here is that instead of utilizing these zone inside runs, the Raiders are going to go to power-based inside runs. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's not confusing. I love the fact that they're going to run man on the inside or power, right? Man, power, it's the same thing. I love the fact that the Raiders are going to run man blocking schemes to the inside because, to me, in my opinion, the duo scheme is by far the best running scheme, and it's not close. Sean McVay has absolutely revolutionized duo. And Sean McVay's done this multiple times, one of the smartest offensive minds in the entire NFL. Before, the way they used to block duo was just basic, left tackle, tight end, right tackle, all just block outwards, right? They're going to find the guy that's essentially to the outside of them, and they're going to set themselves up to the inside, and they're going to just wall those guys off. And then basically your guard and center, and usually it'll be one of the tackles. You got 4 offensive linemen. You're essentially going to end up double teaming the 2 defensive tackles, and then you're going to climb up to the linebacker. Now, if you take those 4 offensive linemen, right, it'll be one of the tackles, both guards, a center. If you double team the 2 D tackles and climb up to the linebacker, that's actually 5 gaps in between those 4 offensive linemen. And with only 4 guys, you don't have enough guys to cover those gaps. So essentially, when you run duo concepts, what ends up happening is you're basically telling your running back, just find the lane. There's going to be 5 gaps for you to run through. Just find whichever one's open. So duo is has similar, for the running back at least, has similar concepts to a zone run, but it's just different, right? It's blocked different. It's a lot more straightforward for offensive linemen. The Raiders were practicing this, and when I had seen that they were practicing duo, essentially what they were doing was the guard center would double team the D tackle, and then the linebacker would jump the gap. And then they just have to figure out which guy's going to essentially get to him, right? Is it the center? Is it the guard? And they were practicing this, and I already thought about it in that moment that, hey, they're going to run duo this upcoming season. But the fact that Lincoln Kennedy is telling us that basically for the interior, they're mostly going to these man blocking schemes, I think it's the right way. If you can tell me, hey, pick 2 types of runs, and you can only run these 2 type of runs on every single play. You can't do any other type of run. To me, it's wide zones the first, and then duo is the second one. And I would run those two concepts. You don't need anything else. And that's apparently what the Raiders are going to be doing, which also tells me Chip Kelly understands how to have success in the NFL, especially when it comes to the run game. And again, remember, when you're running wide zone, if Colton Miller, who I think is one of the best blocking offensive tackles in the NFL, if Colton Miller hooks one guy off, that's all it takes. Ashton Jeanty could be gone. And if that defensive end really goes outside and Colton Miller can just kind of push him outwards a little bit, one cut and Ashton Jeanty's gone. It's why we see Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane having so much success. Ashton Jeanty, to me, can have that same type of success. And also, Boise State ran a lot of duo as well. And with Ashton Jeanty, I think he's already kind of done that, so he should be able to naturally have success. But I love getting this type of insight from some of these guys. And shout out to the website, man. Raiders Beat. If you guys don't know what Raiders Beat is, man, I'm telling you guys, there's the website right there, RaidersBeat.com. It is by far the best Raiders website. It's better than The Athletic. It's better than, Silver, all the other ones. It's just the best one. This guy not only goes out of his way and finds all the little things that you want to kind of know, right? Like this is important as hell, in my opinion, right? But then he'll, put it out there. If there's a guy flashing and having success, he'll put those reports out. Raiders Beat's the one to go to, man. Really, really enjoy it. Let me know what you guys think, man. What are your guys' thoughts on both Christian Wilkins and the unfortunate news that's kind of coming out? And then what do you guys think about the run scheme? I think it's an elite run scheme. And I also think Chip Kelly is a great coach. So I don't think he's going to fail. I'll just wrap it up with this just to kind of remind you guys. There was a time when people were like, Sanjit, you're way too negative. I'm unsubscribing from your YouTube channel. This was just last year. And I had hundreds of these type of comments where people are saying you're too negative because you're always saying Luke Getsy sucks. He's not a good coach. You're basically rooting for Luke Getsy to fail. The thing is I had watched Luke Getsy the 2 previous years that he was with the Chicago Bears, and he was just a bad coach. Like, I wasn't rooting for him to fail. I just saw that he was a bad coach. Luke Getsy is similar to Paul Guenther. If you guys remember, the Raiders had Paul Guenther as their defensive coach. Paul Guenther did not know how to install a defense. Paul Guenther was a good defensive coordinator for the Bengals, but that was because he already had a defense that was pre-installed. I believe it was Mike Zimmer that was defensive coordinator for the Vikings. He installed the defense. Paul Guenther jumped on, kind of learned what Mike Zimmer had done. But Paul Guenther never installed his own defense, ever. He never had to do it. But when he came to the Raiders, it was the first time he had to do it. And he sucked at it. He didn't know how to do it, right? Now, he might know how to do it in the future, but he didn't know how to do it at that point. And Luke Getsy also did not know how to install an offense. One of the main reasons why offensive coordinators or defensive coordinators fail is because they don't know how to install an offense or install a defense. It's not the same as like, hey, I'm just taking over something that someone else had already installed, right? It's not the same process. But with that, I say all that to say Chip Kelly has installed an offense multiple times, right? Chip Kelly at Oregon had success on offense. The Philadelphia Eagles had success on offense. The 49ers didn't have as much, but he was fired after 1 year. But then he went to UCLA and he had success there. He went to Ohio State. He had success there. This guy's done this, 5-6 times at this point. Now he's going to come to the Raiders. I am confident this guy knows how to properly install an offense. And it has me excited for this Raiders team. And I really do think we're going to be a good football team this year. I think we make the playoffs. I think we're going to be a team where, when, let's say like December comes around, we're going to be thinking Super Bowl in our minds. All right. So let me know what you guys think, man. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time with another video.